Hey everybody, this is John Corcoran, and I'm going to do a presentation today on how to network with A-listers in any industry. And this is a presentation that I probably has been germinating in my head for a really long time, and a lot of family and friends have bugged me for a while to talk about it more, about how I go about networking, and I never thought it was that big a deal. And then I did a presentation to a mastermind group that I'm a member of recently, and they thought it was great and really thought I should share it. So I figured, well, all right, I'll share it. And so I think that there's some really actionable advice that you can put into practice in terms of your networking, because so often, let's face it, people consider networking to be, throwing a bunch of people in a room, throw together some wine, some cocktails, some finger snacks, and, it's supposed to create magic, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And it can really have a big impact on in terms of your bottom line, get you a better job, get you more clients, get you more customers, more revenue in the door. So I think it's really an important skill to develop. And I've honed my system over the last 20 years or so. And so hopefully you like it. So enjoy. So here we are, how to network with A-listers in any industry. My name is John Corcoran. I blog at a blog called smartbusinessrevolution.com. You're welcome to check me out there. There's going to be basically 4 parts to this presentation. I'm going to talk about how I got a job at the White House. I actually worked at the Clinton White House. And I'm sure you saw the pictures, but I also have met President Obama, did some work on his campaign. I'm going to talk about how that came about as well. And then I'm going to talk about the differences between how I used to do networking many years ago when I got a job at the White House, and also how I've added in new social media tools. Because today, let's be honest, things have changed dramatically with all the social media that's available. It's a tremendous opportunities for keeping in touch with people within your network without having to see them face to face all that frequently, although I do believe that that's a very important component of networking. And then I'm going to talk about how you can use this system as well, how you can implement it in your practices. So first of all, why is networking important? What is so important about networking? Well, I think that networking can mean a number of different things. It can mean a better job for you. It can mean more, if you're in business, more clients or customers to you. It can mean more revenue in the door. You're making more income over the course of your lifetime. You're frankly more valuable and helpful to others. There's not often a time that I go to coffee or lunch with someone, and if I learn enough about that person, or I ask enough questions about what's going on in their life, that there isn't someone in my personal network that I feel like I can introduce that person to, and that it would be valuable. And if you do that, that's a tremendous value to people. People really remember it when you introduce them to someone else, and it ends up being, a fruitful relationship. It can also lead to better experiences and more fun in life. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures in a couple minutes of some of the fun perks that I've gotten from having a wide network and getting to know a lot of people. And I do want to say, I really hate the term networking because it sounds so sleazy. It sounds like something you're doing to be manipulative. But as you'll see, I really believe that you need to have a philosophical shift. And, I wish the term was something like friending or something, not networking, because networking sounds like you're really just trying to get something out of people. But that's really the wrong approach. So, as I said, philosophical shift, but think about using networking to be helpful to others, not to get help from others. I'm going to say that again. Use networking to be helpful to others, not to get help from others. And when you make that philosophical shift, when you go and meet someone face to face, or you meet them over email, or you get to know them over social media, and you start thinking about how you can help them rather than how they can help you, then when you do need something, you will find that many more people want to help you. I was talking to a friend recently who had this great analogy for it. He said, networking is kind of like, if you had to move, move to a new apartment, you had a couch, you need to move down 3 flights of stairs, you wouldn't go down to the bar and start making friends so that you can get people to help you move. And networking is kind of like that. You make friends throughout the year so that you have friends, and so you get to know people, and so they get to know, like, and trust you. And then if it comes time that you need some people to help you move a couch, you buy a couple pizzas and you get them to help you out. So you really have to think about it that way. Okay, so I'm going to start off here. This will relate, trust me, but you probably don't recognize the guy on the left. The guy on the right is Gene Siskel of Siskel and Ebert. This is the Academy Awards. And the guy on the left is my dad. My dad was actually on TV news. He was an entertainment reporter on TV news for about 20 years or so. And when I was growing up, from time I was a little kid straight through high school, he was on live TV every night. And he kind of jokingly refers to himself as a minor TV celebrity. And because of that, when we were growing up, we moved around a couple times when I was younger. But, we'd be out in a grocery store or restaurants or at a park or something like that, and people would recognize him and treat him like a celebrity, although, he's just my dad. But, treat him differently. And the reason I bring this up is because networking with people who are important, who are VIPs, who are A-listers in your industry is really similar to reaching out to celebrities and how you would approach celebrities, because you have to remember celebrities are just humans too. And so I grew up with this type of experience with my dad, who was, not a huge celebrity, but a minor celebrity. And this is what he did for a living. He did a lot of interviews. That's him with Richard Pryor in the bottom left. That's him with Bo Diddley, bottom left, Richard Pryor, bottom right, Shirley MacLaine, and Josh Mankiewicz from Dateline NBC in the top left. And then this is him. He actually was a stand-up comedian for a while, doing stand-up comedy there. And on the right, he's at one of the Academy Awards again. And so that's what I grew up with, that with him, having that experience of people coming up to my dad and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and how people developed relationships, genuine relationships with him, and who didn't. And so I'm going to just talk a little about what networking has done for me, what significant role it's had in my life. You've seen the pictures already, but first I want to start off with this picture. Somehow my dad got me this. I'm not sure, but I was on stage with Penn Teller on my 13th birthday. Okay, so here I am, 13, and there's a couple of reasons why I'm including this photo. One is because I was a pudgy kid. I used to come home from school in 7th grade and play video games for hours on end. I'd play Super Mario Brothers on Nintendo, and I'd eat bowl after bowl of sour cream, onion, potato chips, and drink cherry Cokes. And then my brother would come home, we'd play some more. And, I was just this fat, lazy kid. And part of the reason I'm showing you that is because I'm going to show you some other pictures in a second that I kind of call like ego pictures, and I'm not too crazy about showing them off, but I'm showing them off for effect, for the purposes of this. But I want you to remember, I like to think of myself as more of a humble guy from humble beginnings, and so I'm not the pictures that I'm showing off. Anyways, so that's me at 13, and then let's flash forward 10 years to me 10 years later, and this is me at 23. On the left, it's with President Clinton in the Oval Office, and on the right, that's me and my brother in the press room at the White House. And I'll tell the story about how I got the job. So I was in college, and I, didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Yale. I went to UC Santa Barbara, which still has a reputation as kind of a party school. But I applied to do the White House internship program, which they take hundreds of kids a year. A lot of people do it, and not everyone gets a job at the White House afterwards. But I really wanted to get a job at the White House afterwards, and so that was my goal for a number of years. Not a number of years, but a year or so. I ended up going back to college and graduating. I had another semester left, and then I went to work in the entertainment industry. I was from LA, so I was living in LA, and a couple of things I did were significant. One was I was working at the time at DreamWorks, which is Steven Spielberg's studio. That's a whole nother story how I got that. But I was working there, and that really helped to differentiate me by excelling in another area. And I wasn't really even excelling. I was a low-level grunt trying to establish myself. But it was different, and it was also a studio that, the Spielberg was a big Clinton supporter, so it looked attractive from a distance. The other thing, very important thing I did, is I kept in touch with the connections I'd made when I was at the White House. So I created a list of who I needed to keep in touch with. It was the speechwriters. It was other people who worked at the White House. It was other people in Washington, D.C. who would maybe hear about jobs, so I could get back there. And I kept in touch with them regularly. That's really key. You want to keep in touch with them regularly so you're at the top of their mind, so they think of you if they hear about a job opening. And that's exactly what happened. One of the speechwriters heard about this job as a writer in presidential letters and messages, which is kind of like a second-tier speechwriter. And he told me about it, forwarded along my resume, and then I was going along. And the funny thing was, the woman who ended up hiring me, became my boss, the day she called me, she calls and says, "Yeah, I got your resume. I understand you're interested in applying for this job. I'd like to get some writing samples from you." And I said, "Sure, okay, I can send you some writing samples. But, oh, by the way, if you want to see my writing right away, you can look at today's New York Times. I have a letter to the editor in the New York Times today." And the funny thing is that it wasn't all that difficult. I don't believe it's all that difficult to get just a letter to the editor in there. Op-eds, of course, are a lot more difficult, but a letter to the editor wasn't. But it was impressive because it was immediate and it was a big publication, obviously everyone's heard of. So that really, I think, helped a lot with greasing the wheels, so to speak, and getting me that position. So let's kind of go over the things that I did that helped me get to this position. And then I'm going to talk about how I met President Obama as well in a little bit. But relationships, so important. I identified those who could help me in my journey trying to get a job at the White House, my end goal. And then I kept in touch with them regularly, the top of mind strategy I talked about a second ago. By, back then it was email, sending things in the mail. I'd clip something out that I saw and mail it to a speechwriter, just keeping in touch with them regularly. And then the other thing I did is through the internship program, I volunteered with no expectation of anything in return because I had no guarantee that I would get a job there, but I still did it anyways. And that's kind of been a theme in my life. When you do put strategic effort into volunteering, it can lead to very good results. Also, I distinguished myself by being different by, rather than working on Capitol Hill, like a lot of people did who wanted to work at the White House, I worked in Los Angeles for DreamWorks, which was very different. And finally, when my future boss called me, I was prepared. I knew that she might call, and I'd send in the letter to the editor to the New York Times. This is me and President Obama on the top left in 2007 when he was running. Excuse me. And bottom right is once he was president with my wife, Nicole, at an event. And the way this came about was in the 2004 presidential campaign, I had pretty much exited politics and I was in law school at the time, but I connected with a lot of different people in politics, and the presidential candidates then, John Kerry, Howard Dean, Wes Clark, were all coming through the San Francisco Bay Area where I lived, and I helped with a bunch of their campaigns. Of course, none of them got elected. President Bush got reelected. But flash forward 3 years to 2007, and because of those people that I'd volunteered with, because I didn't get paid to help with the presidential campaigns, I had a network of people who worked in politics, and so I got contacted to help with an Obama event in 2007, and this was when he was, really battling it out with Hillary Clinton before even any of the primaries had happened. So that was a very cool experience meeting him, and then after getting hooked up with those folks who worked on the Obama campaign, I went from there to also helping with some other events, and that's how my wife and I got to get that picture in the bottom right as well. In 2009, we helped with an event after he was president, and it came through San Francisco. This is something. This is another funny experience. So another person who I connected with, actually through the Obama campaign, was a guy named Joe, who I just talked to recently. Really good guy and a genuine friend who I became friends with. And he and I kind of connected over. We're a little bit fascinated with electric cars and Tesla. But this was late 2008, early 2009. And it turns out Joe knew someone at Tesla. So we go down to the dealership one day, not the dealership, they had one location at that time. And they flipped us the keys to a Roadster. They had less than 100 of them were on the road at that point. And they just flip us keys and say, "Hey, come back whenever you can." They didn't give us a deadline or anything. And we left for about 2-3 hours driving this thing all over the place. It was a blast, and it was turning heads right and left. No one knew what it was on the road. They were just fascinated by it. So it was really cool. That was kind of a really fun experience. And I can say that it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for connecting with someone and developing a genuine relationship with them. Here's one other really cool experience, and I can say that this next experience came directly from giving a genuine compliment, which is something else I want to talk about. So this is my wife and I standing on the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. If you looked over the rail there, it was a petrifying experience, but if you looked over the rail and looked down at the water, it was 75 stories straight down, totally petrifying. The reason we got this was I was at an event, seeing a local elected official speak on a couple of different topics, and he was someone that I really looked up to, really admired. He was in elected office in Marin. He was a member of the Bridge District Board of Directors for the Golden Gate Bridge District, and he actually passed away a couple years ago, unfortunately. But I went up to him afterwards. I could have left. There were a lot of people were waiting to talk to him. I waited. And then I just said, I really admire what you've been doing. I really admire your contributions, how you've represented your district. And, he was a bit of a tree hugger. I'm a bit of a tree hugger. I admire your positions on the environment. And I know you've taken a lot of flack in the press. And I just want to thank you for what you're doing. And that ended up, he was really appreciative of that comment, and we ended up developing a really, really nice friendship. I mean, he was a really good, close friend. And as a consequence of that, the directors had the opportunity to let some people go up the bridge. And so we had this tremendous experience, these incredible pictures of going up to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. So the lesson number one that I want to impart on you is to treat A-listers in your industry like celebrities. Going back to the pictures that I showed you earlier of my dad, you want to treat them like they're celebrities. And it's easier said than done, but there's some tricks to it. So who's a better source but my dad? So I went back and I asked my dad for advice on how people should reach out to celebrities and busy people as well. Busy, important people is generally the kind of people you want to, build your network with. Well, number one, he said, build a relationship first. Long before you're asking for something, you want to build a relationship with them. So you want to not be seen as immediately asking them to do something for you. And then you make your communications with them short and be positive, but also be yourself. I mean, be normal, You remember that celebrities are important people, A-listers, whatever, the CEO of a company, whoever is important to you in your industry, they are individuals too. They're humans. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. Just remember that. Remind yourself of that. Now, another one illustrated by the Golden Gate Bridge story is everyone loves a sincere compliment. And I remember a story my dad told me about when he was an entertainment reporter and did movie reviews as well. And this was a while ago, a long time ago, but he was at an event, a public event, and a certain director came up to him and was talking to him, and he said, you're the only critic that I watch, he said. And that was such a huge compliment to my dad. He really appreciated that. It happened to be Steven Spielberg who said that. This is long before I went to go work for DreamWorks. But that kind of sincere compliment, if it came from Steven Spielberg or anyone else, is the kind of thing you want to think about. Like, I'll tell you a funny story. I knew a guy who was walking down the streets of New York. He's walking, Midtown Manhattan, and he walks past Harrison Ford. He's like, holy crap, that was Harrison Ford. And he walks another block thinking, I got to go talk to him. So he turns around, runs back a full city block back to Harrison Ford, runs up to him, and he blurts out, Han Solo is awesome. And it was just like the stupidest thing you could ever say to someone, because think about it. What if you're Harrison Ford, what do you say to something like that? Just kind of boneheaded comment from someone. Now compare that to, what if you knew something about Harrison Ford? What if you knew he had a passion, like a personal passion, like art, like say he likes painting. If you knew that, and you went up to him and didn't disturb him, not like, disturbing him while he's having a meal or something like that, but you just stop him briefly and say, "Hi, Harrison," or "Hi, Mr. Ford. I just want to let you know, I saw some of your art recently and I really enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of contemporary art, or whatever it is kind of art he does. And I thought it was great." That would be so appreciated. Now, if you take that approach to important people, giving people a sincere compliment is a great way to start to build a relationship with them. Now, another thing is even celebrities can use favors, or VIPs. Everyone, even no matter how big you are, eventually you can use help with something. You have a book coming out, you have a product coming out, a business that's launching. You need an introduction to someone. They want to broaden their network. So doing favors for people is huge. And remember that. Just make sure that it's a favor that you think would be useful to them. Being helpful. This goes to the favor topic as well, but when they're promoting something, being helpful with helping them to promote it is a great way. Like one thing I've done that I'm going to talk about a little bit later is doing interviews of people who've got new books out through my podcast. That's a great tool. And then getting through the lower layers is half the battle. So as people get more important, they've got a secretary or they've got a staff below them. That's gotten a little bit easier with social media now because you can communicate with people often, even important people, through Twitter or sometimes even email if they're responsive to email. But that can be a struggle. So this was kind of what my networking system was when I got a job working at the White House and before we had the advent of social media. But first, identifying who you want to keep in touch with. So that's going to be different for everyone, but we're going to talk about that in a second. But you want to think about who are the people that you want to keep in touch with. And then you keep in touch with them on a regular schedule. And everyone can do this a little bit differently. I used to do it more manually or just kind of fly by the seat of my pants. I now have a tool that I'll talk about a little bit. Distinguish yourself in another attractive area. So in my case, when I wanted to get a job at the White House, I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Stanford or Georgetown. I went to UCSB, which is an okay school, but a little bit of a party school reputation. But I worked in the entertainment industry. I worked for DreamWorks, and that distinguished me in a different way. And then also doing things that stand out within your control, like the New York Times letter that I sent. That really stood out. I'm sure for her that made quite an impression. She probably didn't call many potential writers who were able to say that, "Oh, I have something in the New York Times today," when she called them. And then also volunteering with no expectation of anything in return, but being strategic about it. So, of course, it would be great if you wanted to serve meals to the poor on a weekly basis. That's great, but we're talking more about business. We're talking about career development. And so we're talking about how to be strategic in the efforts that you put in if you are volunteering. So what's the difference between that system, which I had in 1999 when I got the job in the Clinton White House, and 2013? There's a huge amount of difference. So many different social media tools have come along, and people are just generally busier and busier. We're inundated with email and Facebook and social media and Twitter. There's a lot to keep up with. There's a lot of different tools that you can use, but it's also difficult to break through with people. So my new system now how I've updated it is, first, I create a master target list of who you want to get to know better. And it's important to write them down. So I recommend you start with about 50 people or so. And it can be a lot of different categories. It could be people you don't know, people you already know, but you want to get to know better. It could be clients and customers of yours. And then you want to connect with them on social media. So make sure you're following what they do on social media. Most people are active on something, whether it's at least LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Most people are not active on all of them, but find out where they are and then follow them there to see what's going on in their life. And then help them first. Promote their business or products. If they have a book coming out, promote it. If they have a new business, mention it to your followers, and try and cultivate and build your own followers so that you promoting them to your audience is more valuable to them. I mean, if you are on Twitter and you have 100 followers versus 1,000 followers, they're going to appreciate it more if you have a lot more followers to promote it to. And then using a reminder system to keep in touch. This is important because otherwise what I've found is there will be important people, individuals, referral partners who many months will go by and I haven't communicated with them in 6 or 9 months or so. And that'll make, that'll mean I haven't been getting, referrals from them. So you want to make sure that you're keeping in touch with them regularly. And then if you don't have a blog yet, a great tool is starting a blog and writing about them on it. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then finally interviewing them. That's a great tool that I strongly advocate. I'm going to talk about that strategy as well, what the modern day informational interview looks like. So if you had a pyramid, I probably should have a pyramid on the slide, but if you had a pyramid, a relationship pyramid, at the top of the pyramid, the most important relationship is to have a genuine friendship, to have them know, like, and trust you. Genuine friendship with the A-lister or VIP or the important person who can help you and who you can help. But the question is, how do you get there? Now, this is a really crappy slide, but this is meant to be read at the bottom. So look at the bottom here and work your way up. These are the things, these are the tools that I implement on the way up to develop a relationship with someone in today's landscape. So number one, connecting on social media. And so that, first, it might mean connecting on Twitter, following them on Twitter, and then LinkedIn, and then Facebook. It depends really if they have a page or how personal they are in their Facebook. Everyone has kind of different approaches, but once you get to that point, then you start actively engaging and commenting on LinkedIn and Facebook. On LinkedIn, you could join other groups they belong to. Maybe they're active in that. Some people do that. On Twitter, if they're active in Twitter, this is a great tool. You can see what they're asking, what they're interested in, and answer their questions and be helpful to them. Also retweeting what they're promoting or sharing it on Facebook. If they have an email newsletter, you can subscribe to that and you can reply to it. If they are the type that read it and respond, that's a great way. And then also another great tool I've used is doing a video or written review of their product or book. I can talk about that a little bit later, or their business. And then of course, if you haven't met them face to face, attending them at an event they are at after you've started to build these relationships is a great tool. And then finally, you have genuine friendship, hopefully. Now, here's the master target list idea, and this is just a basic spreadsheet that I created where I call it the relationships to build template, but you can just kind of include basic information about people. And I recommend you start with about 50 people or so, and maybe eventually start to increase it. And you include, if they have a website, hopefully almost everyone has a website these days. So you got their website, first name, last name, some notes about them, what their target audience is. So you might be really passionate about gardening and you follow some gardening website or gardening blog. But if you're an interior designer, getting to know someone who's got a popular gardening blog is not going to help you that much. Getting to know someone who's got a popular interior designer blog or who's very important in that industry is going to be really a lot more helpful to you. So you want to include people you don't know yet, who you want to get to know, people you know already but want to get to know better. And also important one is past clients and customers. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how I've deepened relationships with past clients and customers. So, as I said, who should be on this master list? Other professionals, VIPs, influencers, also friends of friends and connections of your friends. So people who are one step removed from you is a good, group of people to connect with. And then people who understand the reciprocity system, because not everyone does. You'll find that there may be some people that you're helping and they just don't reciprocate. And that's very limiting, because if they don't, then you're probably never going to get anything out of them. Now, it might be you haven't been doing it long enough, or it might be that what you've asked them for, they just don't feel comfortable doing, or maybe they just don't reciprocate, or maybe they're so important. I mean, if you're following Tony Robbins on Twitter, who's got 1 million+ followers, or Oprah or something, you're not going to get them to retweet something for you. or it's unlikely. And then also people who you just have a personal connection with. Those are the types of people you want to have on this master list. And then step 2 is connecting with them on social media. So on Twitter, you can create a private or a public Twitter list. That's a great tool. What I've done is I created a private Twitter list of people who I want to get to know better, and then I can scan it very quickly and just scan it down for opportunities where I can share something that they did, retweeting it with my followers, or answer a question that they have or help them in some way. LinkedIn, another, as I mentioned, joining groups that they belong to. Facebook, you can like them or like their page. If they have a business page, you can like that page. And then also signing up for the email list. If they have an email list, you definitely want to do that. And then the other really important point I want to acknowledge here is, you wouldn't go to a cocktail party and walk around for half an hour looking at everyone and not talking to anyone and then leave. But people will go on like Facebook for a half an hour looking at everyone else's posts and not commenting, not liking anything, and then leaving. And think about it. If you do that, all the people whose posts you've looked at have no idea you were there. It's like you were a ghost at a cocktail party. So don't be a wallflower. If there are people that you want to get to know you, then you need to be active and you need to engage with them. You need to comment on things that they do, comment through social media. So be active. Here's how you create a private Twitter list. You go to create new list, and then you can do public or private list name. It's a great tool. I really recommend it. And just a word about Twitter. Not everyone's into Twitter, but no matter what industry you're in, I guarantee you that there are going to be some people from your industry that would be good for you to connect with who are going to be on Twitter, and you can use that as a tool. Now, step 3, helping them, especially if they're promoting something like a new book or a product or a business, but watch for opportunities to help on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. Like I've noticed a number of times, especially, even big names on Twitter will be talking about a book that they're writing, maybe a book proposal they put in, or maybe they're testing on different titles for their book, and they want some feedback on it. And that's a great opportunity to step forward and to help them and for them to start to get to know you, because, even if they're a very big and popular person and they have a huge network, eventually they'll start to get to know you and recognize your name, and even if it's just kind of a vague recollection, they'll over time get to know you, and that's the goal. Here's another tool that I've done that I'm a huge fan of, doing video reviews of products. So I read the book The Entrepreneur Equation by Carol Roth, who is a CNBC contributor. She's on cable network TV very frequently. It was a great book. I sat down in front of my laptop like I'm sitting right now in my office with a copy of the book and recorded a 2 or 3 minute video of me reviewing it, posted it on my blog, and then what I typically do is just send a link to them, email it to them, say, hey, just want to let you know I just posted this. In this case, she actually discovered it from a Google News alert faster than I could send it to her, and she put a comment on YouTube below it saying, hey, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Which was pretty damn cool. And then she sent me an email, thanks for doing this. I had picked it up on a Google alert and left a message on YouTube, glad you enjoyed it. And then since then, I've had a couple of exchanges with her on social media, mostly on Twitter. And I don't know how much she knows me, maybe not at all. Maybe I'm deluding myself. But it's a great tool for starting to get to know someone. So hopefully she has an idea who I am. Okay. And then another thing I did was I did a review of the $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau, another book that was a really good book by Chris Guillebeau. I was a real big fan of it. Chris is a very popular blogger and has got quite a following, and he does something called the World Domination Summit in Portland every summer. So I did a review of that, and then I wanted to get him know him a little bit better. I'd actually been to his book signing for $100 startup and met him once there, but there were a lot of people there, so I probably didn't remember me from it. So I did the review, and then I shot him an email, and he sent me a nice email back just saying, "Hey, John, thanks. Glad you enjoyed it. I really appreciate you taking the time to do the review as well." So just a nice little tool for getting to know people. And then, okay, so using a reminder system to follow up regularly. This is something I've done for a while, but I just recently discovered a tool, which is a paid tool, but you might want to check it out because I have a free trial that is a great way of following up with people. So what I used to do is I just would, kind of randomly remember that I hadn't contacted someone in a while and then shoot them an email. Or I'd even put a reminder in my calendar, every 3 months or something, contact such and such. It wasn't a great system, and when your network starts to get pretty large, it's very difficult to do that. Or what you end up doing is you just end up responding to the people who post on social media, and those aren't the only people that you want to connect with. There are some people who maybe they don't post all that frequently on Facebook or LinkedIn, but you still want to connect with them regularly. So I started using this system called Contactually. It's at contactually.com. And a really cool system. What it does is it connects your different email accounts. So I've got a Gmail account and I've got a Google Apps for Business account. And you enter your contact info or your login info for those, and also LinkedIn and Twitter and other social media. And it creates profiles, merged profiles for all these different contacts. And then the cool thing is you can bucket them. You put them in different categories for how frequently you want to follow up with them. So if you really want to deepen a relationship with someone and you want to contact them, every 30 days, you put them in that category. Maybe for some it's 90 or 60 days, some it's every 6 months or every year. But bottom line is it doesn't allow that long period of time to go by where you haven't contacted someone and you just completely drop off their radar. You don't want that to happen. And by the way, if you go to smartbusinessrevolution.com/contactually, you will get an extra month of premium features, and I believe I will as well. So I'd love it if you did that. If you're going to check it out, go use that link. Thanks. And by the way, you already get 2 months for free. So I guess you'd get a third month of premium features. So it's worth checking out. So I mentioned starting a blog and writing about your targets. If you don't have a blog started already, I highly recommend it. It's a great way to start to develop your reputation. So I learned this idea from Kevin O'Keefe, who is of Real Lawyers Have Blogs. I've been reading him for a number of years now. He has a company called LexBlog where he creates blogs for lawyers. But what he does is he will quote mostly other blogs or other writers or journalists. He'll quote a section of them on his blog, and then he'll add something to the discussion to continue it. And then he'll shoot an email to that person saying, "Hey, I just want to let you know I posted this here." And he's been doing this for a long time. But you can do this no matter how big your blog or following is. I did this. I've been doing this for years. I don't do it probably as frequently as I should. But the video review is a similar way of doing that. But just, it's so easy to do. You're reading something that interests you, that you think would be of interest to your following, people who you're trying to target, and you just write up a blog post and you shoot an email with a link to them. Great tool. And then here's another one that I'm really a big fan of is interviewing your targets for a podcast or for your blog. If you have trouble with the podcast technology, which I did for a long period of time, I can only say about podcasts is once you get them set up, it's not that difficult to maintain. And podcast interviews are really the new informational interviews. The example I give is, so, if one person I really admire is Dan Pink, who's the author of To Sell is Human, Drive, A Whole New Mind. And I've read his books and I'm a big fan. If I asked him, he lives in Washington, D.C. If I said, "Hey, I'm going to be in town in Washington, D.C. Will you meet me for a cup of coffee down at Starbucks for half an hour so I can pick your brain about ways in which you can help me and my business?" He'd be like, "Forget it. No, who are you?" But instead, I invited him onto Skype, and I did the same thing with Guy Kawasaki, who is an early employee of Apple, big time author, written, I think 14 books, 12 or 14 books, did the same thing with Guy Kawasaki, invited both of them onto Skype, and they both spent about 45 minutes or so with me over Skype, simply because, and here's the key difference, I was recording it and publishing it to a podcast. Now, it gets easier to get those types of guests as your podcast listenership gets larger, but at least early on, you can start to build with some smaller names that aren't huge names in your industry, and then work your way up to it. But really, that's why I say podcast interviews are the new informational interviews, because it gives you an opportunity to really pick their brain and get some ideas and really learn. I also call it turning your professional development into marketing, because you're professionally developing yourself and your skills, widening your skills, and you're marketing because you're developing a relationship with the important person that you're interviewing, and then you're publishing it to the web where it will exist forever, and people can download it and people can learn more about you and your services. So what value is there in doing interviews, in case you're not convinced yet? But, it's providing valuable content for your existing fans or your clients or buyers. Like, one thing I do is, after I do an interview, if I think it's helpful to one of my clients, I'll shoot a link to them. I'll say, hey, I just recorded this podcast interview. I thought you might want to check it out. You can also attract new fans and clients and buyers, customers who read or listen to your interview and decide, hey, this is someone who I'm interested in, and start following you. It's also a tool to deepen relationship with existing fans or clients or buyers. Like, I'll give you a great example. I have a client who hired me for a very small legal matter, just reviewing a lease. And I got to know him a little better, started to develop a relationship with him. And it turns out he was one of the co-founders of logmein.com, which is now a public company, huge company. And he was one of the co-founders who started it initially. So as I got to get to know him, I eventually asked to do an interview with him. I interviewed him on my podcast, and then eventually he asked me to help him with other legal work as well. And I don't know if that would have come about if I hadn't deepened that relationship through doing an interview. So interviewing your existing clients, your existing customers, is a great way to deepen that relationship. As I mentioned, interviews are like an informational interview. It also gives you a great break from producing content, because you don't have to be the one to produce information for your audience through your blog or through your podcast. And it's also a no pressure way to remind your audience of what you do. So, for example, I have interviewed a number of entrepreneurs who've talked about very difficult breakups with business partners. And one of the things that lawyers like myself are always trying to instill in clients is to make sure that they have solid written partnership agreements in place with partners. And so those interviews are kind of a way of me getting that message across without it being me being preachy. No one would listen to a half an hour podcast of me just talking about how important it is to have a written partnership agreement. That would be so boring, crying out of boredom. But an interview where I'm interviewing an interesting entrepreneur about their experience in this, business partnership that went sour is a lot more interesting. It's like showing people rather than telling them. And then also, as you develop a relationship with the interview subjects, after the fact, you can get some kind of testimonials from them, which I have done. So your goal in doing interviews is to meet and get to know strategically the right people in your industry. So you want to think very strategically about the right people who you should be interviewing, and not spend your time interviewing people who are not all that useful to you. So you do want to think about that. And I want to just give this example of these. You would think that once you achieve a certain level, maybe you don't need to do interviews anymore, because you can just talk and all your audience and followers will be interested in what you have to say. But, top left is Tony Robbins, top right is Oprah. And they continue to this day to do interviews. I mean, Tony Robbins there is interviewing Marie Forleo in that picture. And then bottom left is Dan Pink, the author, who did an office hours once a month. He does it with Chip and Dan Heath, authors of Decisive and Made to Stick. And I imagine they probably will do the same for him when he has a new book coming out. And then bottom right is Jonathan Fields and Chris Guillebeau doing interviews with one another. It's just a great way to provide interesting content and to deepen a relationship. So this is one way that I've used those interviews in the future. So I'll interview someone or do a spotlight of them on my blog, and then I'll take that and I'll excerpt it on my website. So if you go to johncorcoranlaw.com right now, you can see what this looks like. Look at smartbusinessrevolution.com and johncorcoranlaw.com. You can see how I've taken the excerpt and put it on my website. It's a lot more interesting than the typical boring, dry brochure type of content that you get on a static website. So it's a good tool for using it that way. And then after you do an interview, you want to continue to develop the relationship with that person. So ask them if they have any recommendations of other people to interview. Maybe they have some friend or someone that they would like to help. You can share your interview with others, potential clients. You can say, or customers, you can say, check this out, or just having it out there on the web, you'll get some natural search engine traffic. Looking for opportunities to promote that person after you've done the interview. If they have something else that they need promoted, that's a great opportunity for you to get back in touch with them. And then if you haven't met them face to face, you want to go and at some point, whenever you get the opportunity, to go meet them in person. Maybe go to some conference that they're attending is a great opportunity. And then if they have another product or a book or a business or something like that, you can interview them again, do it again and again. And then finally asking for a testimonial. That's another thing you can do. Here's a couple of resources that I want to give you. Impact Equation by Chris Brogan and Julian Smith. Reinventing You by Dory Clark, another great book. Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. That book's about 20 plus years old, but it's still got some great concepts in there, really solid. And then Book Yourself Solid by Michael Port, another great book that I've been influenced by. So I recommend you check out all of these books when you get the chance. And that's about it.